Welcome back to the show, everyone. Today we have a very special guest, someone who's been a familiar face and voice in the motorcycle world for over a decade. Whether you've read his insightful reviews, watched his epic adventures on YouTube, or followed his technical breakdowns, you'll know this name, Zack Courts. Now, Zack has been at the forefront of motorcycle journalism since his days at Motorcyclist magazine, where he became known for his work on the legendary On Two Wheels series. He's also been a driving force behind some of the most entertaining and informative motorcycle content with RevZilla's YouTube shows like Daily Rider and Common Tread. He's also the co-host of High Side Low Side podcast with Spurgeon Dunbar. But here's the thing about Zack. He doesn't just talk about motorcycles, he lives them. He is a proper road tester. He tests everything from supercharged beasts like the Kawasaki H2SX that I chatted to him about today, to diving deep into commuter scooters and even riding cross country on bikes that most of us wouldn't take across town. Now, Zack's experience spans it all, and what sets him apart is his ability to break down complex technology and make it relatable to everyone, from brand new riders to seasoned veterans. Today, we're going to get into it all: his career in motorcycle journalism, the bikes that stand out, his craziest riding experiences, and of course, his thoughts on where motorcycling is headed. So, without further ado, let's give a warm welcome to the one and only Zack Courts. Well, hey, it's really great to be here today with someone who I've been following actually since 2018, about around that time when I first discovered Zack's work. And so this is Zack Courts. You just saw the intro earlier, so I won't go into that too much. But Zack, welcome to the podcast, and thanks for making the time.
Absolutely, yeah. I'm flattered that you think I'm interesting enough to talk to, and I like talking about bikes, as you know. I sort of do it for a living, so I'm happy to have a conversation with you. This should be fun.
Yeah, what was interesting to me about your background is it's almost like we're like brothers from another kind of world, because so I read one of your articles. I think it was called The Last Road North. I think it was. You wrote a BMW 1200 GS
Yes,
up
to
a
the top of
Dalton
Alaska.
Highway. That's
Yes.
right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'd ridden around the world. I've ridden across Australia, Asia, most of Japan, New Zealand, and a large part of Eastern Europe, touring on motorcycles.
Mm-hmm.
And when I read your article, it was like, this is my guy. And then, I'm also into track. And the other article I read was Long Live the King. Yeah, so it was a superbike article, Ducati superbike article around the transition to the V4.
Okay, right on.
Right? And I'm like,
Yeah.
okay, this guy. And then I start watching you more, and I'm like, wait a minute, dude's into scooters. So I grew up on scooters. Like my first motorcycle was a GS 160 Vespa. And then we used to put Molossi chambers on them and race them on the racetrack in New Zealand in the late 80s. And I'm like, this dude's like into scooters, touring, and track. I mean, we must be related.
Did you race scooters, or was it was your intro into two wheels and then you raced them, or like you just started racing them right away, or?
Intro into two wheels first, because it was the whole mod revival.
Okay.
I'm an old guy, so there was this whole mod revival. All right.
So, and are scooters a big deal in New Zealand? I guess I wouldn't have expected that, but I don't know. It's not. I've never been there, so I can't say.
Yeah, you got to get down there and ride. Yeah, they are a really big deal, and
cool.
Yeah, they are. They certainly were, and they still tend to be, because we're more British in our culture, and there was a big British influence from the 60s.
Okay, yeah, right on. Well, yeah, it sounds like we got plenty to talk about, between riding on lonely roads on adventure bikes, to riding super bikes on racetracks, to scooters.
Yeah, I enjoy your banter. I love the perspective, and what I'm really curious about, there's so many things I'm curious about. But there are a couple of constants in your career,
mm-hmm.
and frankly, your life. One of them is Ari Henning.
Right. Yeah.
Right. And like you guys have been mates as kids, and then in a career together, and like
Yeah.
I'm really curious about that whole thing because I've watched him race, and he's fast as hell, and he's pretty good with a wrench, and that's super interesting. And then your I suppose your perspective has been very consistent around two wheels. Doesn't matter if it's a scooter or a track bike. You just love two wheels, and
Yeah.
sometimes you like three wheels. I think because you do the
Sometimes, yeah.
yeah. How did is that? Is like that always been how you roll? So like
Hmm.
curious about that.
Yeah, I guess to address the whole like I guess if I'm reading between the lines of your question a little bit, you're sort of saying I seem like I'm excited about lots of different two-wheeled vehicles, not specific ones. Like I don't seem like
Yeah.
I'm yeah. I think I don't know. I guess part of it's like a background thing. You know, I grew up um riding a bicycle at a young age and I think that I spent a long time on a bicycle before my parents got me a motorcycle. And I only learned recently actually that was a very intentional thing that my dad did because he felt like I should have to create my own uh, kinetic energy. You know, I should have to propel myself on a bicycle and learn to control the vehicle and learn to fall off it and whatever, you know, like make mistakes under my own power before he gave me an engine to power me. And I guess I bring that up because I think that that feeling that you have on a bicycle as a kid is is how as I think connected to how I feel on just about any two-wheel vehicle, and whether it's a scooter or a super bike or whatever, because it offers you this sort of different style of transport and agility and freedom that not that other forms of transportation don't. And so it's easy to slip into a type of riding. You know, there are plenty of people who are into sport bikes and like that's what they like. And then when they see a Harley, they're like, no, Harleys are stupid. That's dumb. Or they're into little mopeds, and anytime they see a big touring bike, they're like, no, those are big and heavy and slow, and old fat guys ride them. And I'm not an old fat guy, so I'm not going to be a part of that. Excuse me. But I think that that I I'm not sure if it was my dad's influence or someone else in my life or something or just my own experiences, but I always just sort of got a kick out of riding just about anything with two wheels. I just think it's fun. And I prefer to see the similarities rather than the differences, I guess. Or maybe the similarities resonate with me more than the differences do. And I can totally appreciate that a Honda Goldwing is big and heavy.
Mm.
And a you know, Kawasaki Ninja 500 is small and light. But I just like riding both of them for the different reasons. And I enjoy the things that they are good at, because ultimately I just like that feeling of being on two wheels, of like having my own freedom in my own vehicle.
Yeah. Yeah, that's absolutely clear. And I wonder, I know that your father was in the Peace Corps, right? And
Yes.
I'd read somewhere that like literally had some pretty cool like adventures, like riding in places like Morocco
Mm-hmm.
and that sort of thing. Do you think do you think you would have felt the way you feel without that influence, or do you think it was just like you were born with the motorcycle gene?
Yeah, I mean, you know, his influence certainly, you know, anyone who has a father or mother or an uncle or, you know, some sort of parental, you know, some sort of guardian figure in
Yeah,
your life when you're young that is into motorcycles, that really obviously that imparts a lot, right? Because we're impressionable, especially when we're young, and um, we look up to those people, um, and so yeah, certainly, you know, my dad's influence is big, but also my mom, like she she rode motorcycles in Morocco too. She was not a, you know, she didn't pursue motorcycles in the way my dad did. It's his thing, not her thing.
mm,
But she rode in Morocco also. And they did their honeymoon across Europe and Eastern Europe, two up on a motorcycle. And while motorcycles were not her thing, she supported it in kind of interesting way. In retrospect, I think my generation, the sort of millennial generation, as parents,
mm,
are very protective and nervous. um, and I think that my parents are kind of like, you know, they were hippies that had a kid in the early 80s, and they were kind of like, yeah, well, I don't know, whatever, like, do you want to do what you want to do, you know? And I raced the motorcycles, and I think it made my parents nervous probably. But I can remember my mom being at the races when I road raced when I was a teenager, and I crashed in the race. And one of our friends came up later, an adult friend that I had, And they said, yeah, when you crashed and you didn't come around that lap, everyone was really worried. Everyone's like, where is he? Where is he? And your mom was kind of like, there's nothing we can do about it. There isn't, like, I can panic right now if I want to, because my son is missing on a racetrack and that's scary. But I think she always had that perspective of sort of like, he's off doing his thing. And I think that, as much as being introduced to motorcycles and being put on them and that kind of thing, I was also encouraged to live my own life and go be my own person in a way that maybe some kids aren't. And so that influence, I think that has a lot of encouraging influence on a child. I think when the parents are sort of like, we're going to teach you about safety. We want you to be safe and not reckless, but also we want you to choose to do things that you love, which I think is lucky.
Yeah, I remember listening to a really great set of high side, low side podcasts where you guys talked about your family and you brought your dad in, and I think that was really cool to hear, actually, and just sort of, I was curious on that note too. Like, were you racing in sidecars with your dad before you got on a bike and started racing, or?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah, I raced with him when I was, I think technically before I was supposed to race. You were supposed to be 16, but I started when I was 15 on the sidecar. I raced with him as a passenger monkey on the sidecar. And then the next year when I was 16, I started solo riding. As those were the rules at the time in the clubs that we were in and whatever. So we bent the rules, and I technically raced. I didn't pilot a bike by myself, but I raced a sidecar like sort of a year too early. For all the clubs, and that was fun. And that, incidentally, that podcast that you're talking about, we had our dads on, and that was the interview that I did with him, that I learned that he was so intentional about not getting me a dirt bike until I was 8 or 9 or whatever, because he was like, I don't think putting a 4-year-old on a dirt bike is the best idea. I think they should like learn to fall off a bicycle first, which I thought was interesting. But anyway, yes, I did ride a sidecar first, and that's also an interesting influence for racing. That's a very that's an atypical way to learn your way around a racetrack, to ride a sidecar. But in retrospect, it was so such a beautiful thing that my dad was this experienced racer by the time I was a teenager, and just a club racer, amateur racer. But I got to ride around with him, like literally next to him, literally looking over his shoulder in left-hand corners, going through curves and like, learning his lines and like seeing how racing worked, which is such an incredibly kind of visceral and hands-on way to learn your way around a racetrack. And I certainly feel fortunate to have had that opportunity.
Well, I know you can ride. I mean, it's cool to watch. I watched you riding, I think it's with Jerez. I think you were riding in Europe recently on a new Panigale.
Yeah, that was Vallelunga in Italy. Yeah, same difference. Your cool European racetrack that in the States we kind of maybe don't appreciate how many rad racing venues there are, and that was one I hadn't been to, just north of Rome in Italy, and really cool track. Yeah. Anyway, you saw a video. Did I post a video, or I posted like a video or something like that?
Yeah, you posted a video, and
oh right, yeah, okay.
I suppose as someone that like in the business you're in, it's okay for me to say that I'm a stalker because I love your content, so I kind of stalk you.
I mean, I'm putting myself out there. If you're following,
Yeah, it's funny. You're obviously a millennial, but you remind me a lot of one of my favorite all-time journalists, Michael Neves.
Okay.
Out of
he was at that launch, I think.
He probably was, yeah. And Michael's more my age, and so he was writing before the internet in many ways. I don't know if you know his story, but it was kind of like a reality show where people had to try out, like they had to go and like record a video, ride a bike, and then you went through this 8-week competition to get hired to be an MCN journalist.
Oh, interesting. That's how he got hired? I didn't know that.
Yeah. And he won it. Yeah. And the rest is history. But what I like about your work is you're deeply technical about all things motorcycling. You've got a lot of different perspectives. And what I love is what we've been talking about is this background of going back to being a kid, because what I find in the US is that motorcycling here for most people is a hobby. It's not a lifestyle. It's not a daily thing that you have to, it's a thing you have in the garage. It gathers dust in the winter and it comes out in summer. Whereas in Europe, the culture is so strong from, I see women in Europe on Vespers that ride the shit out of everyone. I rode through the Dolomites and you had my ass kicked by just amazing riders there. Everyone rides well, and it's a thing, right? And you can lane filter, and cars look out for you, and all of that.
Hmm.
So for a kid raised in the US in a culture that isn't really it's not part of daily life.
Right.
Like, any perspective on that? Or like, LA is pretty cool. You can lane filter there and stuff, but
Yeah, yeah. Los Angeles, I mean, California in general, coastal California anyway, is metropolitan coastal California is sort of European-esque in some ways because yeah, you can filter between cars when you ride, and the weather's good, the climate is temperate, so
yeah,
there's year-round riding, and drivers are more used to seeing motorcycles on the road and that kind of thing. But yeah, you're right. European culture is an interesting thing. The thing I find fascinating about it is that you talk about, people using motorcycles to get around. It's an interesting thing, right? Where like there are people. I'm sure there's a person somewhere in continental Europe, whatever. Let's make up a person, 45, 50-year-old woman who has two kids and a family and whatever. She uses a scooter to get around every day of the week, practically every day of the week, to get around the city that she lives in Italy or Spain or whatever. And she probably puts more miles on than, you know, 90% of the dudes in Los Angeles that think they're hardcore riders. And at the same time, she doesn't really care about motorcycling. Maybe I don't get the feeling that that person that I've just made up really has this sort of like, oh, that's my identity. That's who I am as a
right,
motorcyclist. Like it's just something that she does, and in doing it is probably good at it, and
yeah,
is like has good situational awareness and has good control over the vehicle and blah blah blah, but doesn't identify as that thing. And I guess the way I was raised maybe is kind of a blend of those things. Like I wasn't raised to believe that like that motorcycles are, this holy thing, these deities that we must worship. They're sort of like it's a mutual relationship. It's a partnership that you
yeah,
have with the machine, and you need to learn to respect the machine. But it also doesn't have to be the thing that identifies you. And for me, that's the struggle because it's my job, and it's like it's the
mm,
thing that people know about me more than anything, right? Like they often meet me, and then when I meet that same person a year later, they're like, oh, you're that motorcycle guy. And that's not necessarily how I feel. Like I don't necessarily
mm,
feel like it's all I do. I care about other things. But I guess I think I try to have a sort of like holistic, broader view of the world, um,
yeah.
uh, than just motorcycles, even though um, they've given me so much, and I appreciate the lifestyle and what motorcycling is and does for me so much. Um, but I also think like it's equally important to have other things, and not let that be the center of one's universe, I guess.
Yeah, I'm really curious about that. I have a day job. I actually run my own company, which is a whole lot of fun. And but what I'm really curious about when I look at your content, I see glimmers of what who you are outside of motorcycling. Whether it was you had the on two wheels series, but you also had the MC Commute series, which I feel like Daily Rider kind of maybe spun out of that. But
Yes,
but
absolutely. It's
yeah.
largely
But
the
when I
same
see
thing.
your content, whether it's the crazy stuff you do with Ari, or just your content, uh, it feels like you love the outdoors. You love understanding different types of cultures and people and points of view, and you like kind of doing stuff on the edge, whether it's on a motorcycle or not. And I'm curious about if that's a part of you that maybe not everyone sees.
Hmm. No, I don't know. I think that yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure. I don't think that I don't feel like any more sort of like adventurous or adrenaline fueled than the average person, to be honest.
Okay.
Um um I think that I just have a I guess a sense of wanting to learn and see things, like I'm curious. I think that's a
Yeah.
big piece of like how I end up in motorcycle adventures and how I end up in different places in the world in general. Is that I'm interested in seeing
Yeah.
that stuff. Like, Ari and I did that Dumb and Dumber ride where we built the bike from the movie Dumb and Dumber, the little like mini
Yep.
bike thing, like lawnmower powered mini bike. and then we rode it from Nebraska to Aspen, Colorado, to like they did in the movie, as a sort of like to see what it was like. And that's a gimmicky kind of silly idea for a video on the internet. But honestly, it was kind of born from a genuine slice of curiosity. Like they made this movie in the 90s that was silly about two dumb guys, and one of the things they did was ride a mini bike partway across the United States. And it's a 3-minute scene in the movie. It's blink and you miss it. And for us, I think it was a fun exploration of pop culture, but also like I literally was curious. I was like, well, what does that feel like? What would it be like to do that? Because no one really knows. Like, they didn't do it in the movie. It was just it was a gag. It was a joke about how they rode a little mini bike that far. But I was actually just curious, and I think we sort of knew what it was going to be like, but the adventure that spun out of that was, sort of like different and bigger than we could have expected, because we placed ourselves in that environment, and it was all because we were curious to answer this silly question. And I think that's, yeah, like I said, I don't feel like a true adrenaline junkie. I feel like more of a curiosity junkie.
Curiosity. Yeah, I suppose like for you, you're a journalist, right? That's, and I'm curious. Obviously, journalists are curious.
Right.
Was journalism something that you always wanted to do, or like a lot of us, you just kind of fell into it and enjoyed it, stem maybe from that curiosity that you have?
Yeah, good question. I don't think I did. I liked the idea of writing. I sometime in middle school or high school, I learned to type quickly on a keyboard.
Yeah.
And that was, I think it had to do with like, AOL Instant Messenger, or some sort of like instant messaging service that I was using on my computer to communicate with my friends. And that honed my typing skills accidentally. Like, I didn't learn on purpose, but I learned how to use a keyboard. And that allowed my creativity and like sort of writing skills to blossom a little bit in a way that I hadn't appreciated up to that point, because it's so hard. One of the hard things about writing is organizing one's thoughts and putting them down into words that make sense to read. And I was always really bad at math and science, so writing in English was sort of an obvious thing to gravitate toward. As far as motorcycle journalism specifically, like, I never thought that I would actually do that. It was sort of like by the time I was an adult and I graduated college, I thought of it more as like a retirement plan. It's like, I'll get a real job and I'll live a life that one can be proud of. And then, when I theoretically retire and my kids are in college and I can afford it, I'll go into motorcycle. I'll like write articles about motorcycles because I like it, because whatever, who cares?
Yeah.
And so the career aspect of it did not happen. It happened intentionally, but it didn't happen in the way that I thought it would. Because I made some efforts to make it happen and it didn't work out. And I thought, well, I guess that's that. But I do think, to answer your question, the curiosity helps. It helps to try to have interest in everything in life to tell the good stories, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I see your storytelling. I see the way you bounce off and with your colleagues, like the Spurge and Dunbar relationship on High Side Low Side is really interesting to watch. I mean, my dad was Scottish. Okay, my name is Angus. I thought that was a Scottish name, but Spurge and Dunbar. I mean, man, that's a serious name right there.
It is,
right?
Serious. Yeah.
Oh my God! I heard his name. I'm like, oh my God! I think I've got ancestors from 100 years ago at that name. In Scotland.
Agreed. Yeah. It's a complicated name for a complicated man. That's all I can say.
But you guys, and then I don't. I obviously follow Ari as well, and I feel like now that relationship, since we started talking about your childhood, Ari Henning, for those of you who don't know him, go look him up. I'll put links. A lot of different dimensions to him as well. But when did that relationship start?
Yeah, so our dads raced motorcycles in the same club when we were little kids, and
wow.
When you're a little kid at the racetrack and your dad's racing around, all you have to do is sort of like ricochet around the paddock and cause trouble. And so we did that together. We like rode bicycles and did wheelies and made jumps and stole hot dogs from people's barbecues and stuff. I don't remember that specifically, but yeah, we were just sort of like little track rats. yeah, eventually we're old enough to have dirt bikes, and we sort of like ride dirt bikes around at some tracks, and yeah, and then we disconnected. His dad injured motorcycle racing in the late '90s, around 99, I think, and so we kind of we were teenagers then, sort of middle school age, and we kind of drifted apart because he stopped going to the racetrack, and then in our mid-20s, both moved to California, sort of independent of each other, not really connected at all, and then he sort of spotted me on a race results sheet, I think, in Northern California, and sent me found my email somehow and sent me an email, which we looked up a number of years ago. It was kind of fun when I met my wife about 10 years ago. She heard this story and she said, "Do you have that email where Ari sent you that first email? Do you have it?" And I said, "I don't know. I've never looked for it." And she said, "Well, look for it. I want to see it." And I looked it up, and sure enough, there it was. It was like this like recontact in our 20s of Ari sending me a message saying, "Is this you? Is this the kid that we used to hang out? Do we used to be friends?" And I said, "Hey man, no way. Holy cow." And then that reconnection and rekindling of that friendship led to us working at Motorcycles Magazine together. And then the past 10, 15 years now of being colleagues. So yeah, pretty fun, sort of fun journey to be on together.
That's cool. Those relationships, as an old guy, I'll tell you, like the older you get, it's very rare to actually make new friends as you get really old, like me.
Right.
But the fact you can reconnect, I actually have like a really similar story. New Zealand is a really small place, right? So, we're
right. Sure.
5 million people, 50 million sheep. But no sheep jokes. Australians like the sheep jokes.
Okay.
But it's okay. You can do one later if you want.
Okay. Yeah. I'll noodle on it. Thanks. Yeah. I appreciate that.
Anyway, so for a small country, we bat way above our weight in terms of motorsports, right? The Britain motorcycle, which transformed the world of riding, the McLaren F1, McLaren was a Kiwi, the world's fastest Indian, Burt Munro. There's a lot of amazing, Okay. A lot of people don't know that McLaren was also a New Zealand founded team and company. Okay. But similar, like some of the guys I grew up with, I started this podcast not knowing what the hell I was doing. And I turned out one of my mates knew Simon Crafar because, we're all like, such a small community. Sure. Oh, yeah, Simon will have a chat with you. I couldn't believe it. But he's actually one of those guys that actually, it's very weird that you make friends later in life, but we've become pretty good mates. And there's only 1 degree of separation in New Zealand. It's not hard. Most people you'll meet, they'll know someone US, 300 million people. Have you, obviously our relationship is really strong, but like in terms of, the core friendships you've made, have they come from within the industry? Has the industry become your family in that way? Or you mentioned that, you have a life outside of motorcycling. Like, right. Where do the rest of your friends come from?
Yeah, good question. I think it is easy to gravitate toward friends you have through motorcycling, right? Like you've probably found this, that you're almost more likely to find someone who shares your values when you both participate in an activity that's so uncommon. But really, like there's not very many people that ride motorcycles ultimately in population wise. So it can be easy to connect in that community. But at the same time, I think maybe this goes back to my sort of view of like not assuming that would be the case. Like never assuming that people that like motorcycles would like me or vice versa. I had a buddy, I lived in San Francisco, had a buddy that I played soccer with. And he had a brother who I think passed away kind of young, if I remember correctly. And he was into motorcycles. And one day my buddy and I were hanging out, like getting lunch, sandwiches, whatever. And he said, "Oh, it kind of bums me out when I think about this, because I feel like if you met my brother, you'd have been friends with him and not friends with me." And I said, "Why did you say that?" And he said, "Well, he rode motorcycles and you ride motorcycles. So like, I just assumed that you guys would be buddies." And that I reflect on that sometimes as because what I told my friend at the time was like, I don't think so. Like, there are lots of people that ride motorcycles that I don't like. Not that I think that they should be in prison or anything like that. I just like, we're not the same people. We're not friends. We're not, they're motorcyclists, encompass all walks of life. And so, yeah, I think that's something I've sort of learned, but it's an interesting assumption that people make that you would only ever connect with those people. And to answer your question, like, I think my friends come from, the same place that most people's friends do. They come from like college and rec league sports, and you know, my wife's friends and friends of friends who we've sort of connected and ended up being good friends because we live in the same city or we have kids the same age or something like that. You know, you have all these sort of small gravitational pulls that influence who you hang out with and who you spend time with. But I certainly feel lucky that the people that I work with, you know, Spurgeon, specifically on the podcast, High Side Low Side podcast, and Ari specifically with CTXP Adventures, and also our buddy Spencer, who's the producer and director
Yep.
of all the CTXP and On Two Wheels and Throttle Out adventures that we did. You know, those are in a lot of ways my best friends because we spend so much time together. You kind of can't help it. But I feel fortunate that they have had a good influence on me, and I feel like I think, but maybe we are as people more influenced and drawn into styles of behavior by the people around us than we realize. And I'm surrounded by people that are very motivated and ambitious, and they challenge me to be a better version of myself all the time. And so that I feel fortunate because we spend a lot of time at our jobs. So it's nice to have colleagues that you sort of look up to and respect, I guess.
Yeah, I do believe that birds of a feather flock together. And what's interesting, and I'm really curious about that transition to RevZilla, by the way, because that company's changed a lot too. It's much more of a corporate now. And you obviously transitioned from a magazine to what was becoming a bigger corporate. And I'm really, but just to backtrack a little bit on the community thing, this is a whole nother podcast. But so whenever I meet someone that's into motorcycles, and the first thing they say is, "Oh, let's go for a ride," I'm like, yeah, I don't want to ride with anyone. Yeah, it's funny? Like, it's so funny. I'm like, now the track's different. Like, let's go to the track. Yeah, great. But on a public road, I don't want to ride with, like, no, I don't want to ride with you. I'm really fucking sorry. I mean, like, there's maybe 2 or 3 people that I'll ride with, and it only be 2 of us at a time. Right. And it's kind of to your point. It's like, don't assume that we all want to go riding, right? How do you feel about that? Like,
I'm also like anti-group ride, certainly.
Yeah.
And I think like it's interesting to hear you say that. A lot of times I attribute this to the people that I do get to ride with. Like Ari and I have been on a lot of rides together, and we are very comparable skill wise. And we're also, you know, we have a similar style of like road trip and riding in general. Like we're similar. We tolerate a similar speed on the street. We have a lot of the same, you know, ideals, and the same goes for Spencer and for Spurgeon, though I've spent less time riding with him. But also with my dad, like I've ridden a bunch with my dad, and we have very similar, probably not a coincidence being what with the genetic connection, we have very similar, you know, styles of riding, like how many miles we want to put on in a day and how long we want to stop for lunch and stuff like that. And that has spoiled me rotten. I often ride with other people and I'm like, what are you doing? And it's not that they're doing anything wrong. They're just doing something different than I want to do, you know? And I think that I see it as a good sign that you don't want to ride with people, not because I think that makes you, not because I think it's good to be antisocial or sort of like, you know, give people the cold shoulder, but it shows me that you have confidence and foundation in who you are as a rider. You know, I worry a little bit about riders that only want to ride when there are other people there. They only want to be surrounded by other people. It's sort of like, not that that's wrong. It's just different than the reason that I appreciate motorcycles. And so I definitely represent with you on that one for sure.
Yeah, it's a really interesting topic because, you know, we would race Vespers in New Zealand on the track and also on the street. I put an IT250 piston once into a P200 Vespa, and we would like ride the shit out of these things like really fast on the freeways in no gear, like just everything was different. And then I did a shit ton of touring around the world, and thought I was a pretty good rider, right? And then I turned up to my first track day and realized I've been riding the wrong way for 30 years. And I actually started riding proper track later in life when I actually listened to people and wanted to learn. And so this learner's mindset I find interesting with motorcyclists. And if you can find someone that's willing to learn, for me, it just opens up a whole new world of riding. The physics of riding,
Yeah.
the fact that it's a gyroscope, the fact that all these things about riding, like for you, as someone that's a professional and just what you do for a living,
Yeah.
like, where do you get most of your joy? Is it from the track or the street?
Huh.
Was that a hard question to answer?
Yeah. Hard question to answer. Um, no, I certainly think, yeah, the learner's mindset thing is interesting thing to bring up, because that's, like, you might think that when you started going to the racetrack and you did a few track days and you're sort of like, oh, I dragged knee for the first time. And you had that sort of adrenaline of being like, wow, cool, I'm leaning over and I'm dragging my knee just like the guys on TV or whatever. And then there might have been guys at that track day, say, that were much faster than you, but they don't have the experience of like riding around on a scooter or riding around the
Mm,
world on on dirt roads or touring bikes, adventure bikes, whatever. um i would I would venture to say that even though you were slower than some of those people on the track, you're a better rider because a you have a wide resume, right? Being good at
yeah.
one thing doesn't. Did you feel that way too? Like, do you feel like you learned quicker because of that, maybe? Or did you have any
Yeah.
reflections on the way you learned on the track because you had so much other experience?
It's a good question. Yeah, actually, I did definitely learn quicker. But what I found interesting was at the beginning, I was so focused on going fast. And it wasn't until I realized that actually lines are important, foundations are important,
Right, right.
rider inputs are important. And then one day I'm riding around the track and I thought I was going to have an accident. You know why? Because my knee was dragging and I wasn't trying to drag it. It just started dragging, which for me, you kind of spend this time, I'm going to drag my knee, and you look kind of
Right.
stupid because you're all crossed up but then I started
Reaching. Yeah.
dragging my knee and I shat myself. I'm like, holy shit. Oh, I'm dragging my knee because I'm riding well.
Right. Right.
Right.
Right.
And then it all comes together. And I would have done, let's see, I did 20 track days last year, 25 year
Wow.
before that. I'm an old fat man on a RS 660. I have a Panigale as well, V2, but V4s
Okay.
are ridiculous. They're stupid. I mean,
Yeah.
like,
Kind of
yeah, I
agree.
mean, but yeah. So for you though, I mean, you started out in dirt, and a lot of the great riders started on the dirt,
Mm.
right? Yeah,
Yeah. I mean, I think that, to get back to your first question, I kind of derailed us there asking you a question, but um,
you're a
the
journalist.
yeah, I kind of can't help it. The whole, like, having all those experiences, I definitely think is so important. Like, that's how you get to be better. So, like, do I enjoy the track or the street more? I don't know. There's like, I enjoy a challenge. Like, one of my favorite things to do on a motorcycle is to learn a new racetrack. To be specific, like that, the Panigale V4 video
Mm,
that you talked about seeing on Instagram, the on like quick onboard video that I did,
yeah.
that was a track I'd never been to before I did that event. And they gave, I think we had 6 sessions, 5 or 6 sessions that day. And so you got to get up to speed quick. You got to figure it out because you're there to review the bike. And so there's some pressure there. And I kind of like that. I also just love learning my way around a track and going into one corner and being like, oh, okay, that one like tightens up a little bit more
Mm,
and that opens up a little bit more. And there's a little space there. And I need to go in that one a little. I need to go faster into that corner. Okay, I need to do this. I need to do that. And all those little adjustments, I get such a kick out of that. I absolutely
mm,
love it. Same thing if I go to like some chicken shit go-kart facility in anywhere in the world, and
yeah.
you just like go with friends or something, like, oh cool, some go-karts, let's do go-karts in Portugal or in California or Nevada or wherever the heck you are, it doesn't matter. And uh and I get in the cart and I'm driving around and like they're wobbly and shaky and crappy, and it's like it's a theme park kind of gag, but I love learning the track, trying to figure, okay,
Mm,
there's a hairpin and that opens up in this thing. I love that. And to apply that to the street, I get the same kind of kick when I'm on a new surface or something like that. Like you're riding an adventure bike, you're riding your GS or your Royal Enfield Himalayan
mm,
or whatever out in the boondocks, and you're riding along paved road, and then it changes to gravel. And
mm,
it's unlike a gravel that you've ever ridden on before. It's like a little strange. It's like sort of, the chunks of gravel are a little bigger, say, or a little looser or something than any other surface that you've experienced. And those first few corners of like feeling the tires move on the gravel and judging the crown of the road and all that stuff, triggers the same feeling in my brain of just I really like drinking in that information and trying to figure it out. Same way as I'd like to try to figure out what's the best line through this corner so that I can get to the next corner. And so on an average commute when I ride to work, I probably don't get a lot of that, right? Because I'm riding down the same paved road I rode down for the last 3 years.
Your muscle memory is very.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm listening to the radio and I'm maybe thinking about some other things while trying to be focused on the situation ahead. Always like try to have a meditative state and be really, really focused on the cars around me and the situation that I'm in. But I think I'm probably like learning a little bit less in those situations, but there's always opportunity. Even on a average day riding the same route you always ride, there's always an opportunity to learn. And I guess that's what I'm always, that's the sort of like dog chasing a car mentality that I have, is I'm sort of like, I like logging miles for the sake of maybe tripping over one of those experiences where I learned something. And so that's what I get a kick out of, I guess.
I feel like we're having like you're definitely my brother. We must have been related because I'm really enjoying the chat. It's funny, living in Seattle, I actually, believe it or not, ride every day here, and it rains here. I love to ride. But what I found is interesting is like, Zach, is I actually think riding on the street properly is harder. And the reason I say that, is, you don't have these big, wide tracks. You don't have these big apexes to hit. Your apex is that big. And then you don't get to study the track in the way you would, like the street in the way you would a track, right? And you don't have 20-minute sessions to go out and perfect. You hit the first apex you've ever seen it in your life before on a new road, right? I ride like a little old man on the street. I don't know about you. I think it's because I have a son, and I ride like a little old man on the street. I mean, how about you? Like,
I ride pretty slow on the street. Yeah. I mean, I don't ride slow to some people's, like I certainly I ride sometimes with friends or, I don't know, people that I, contacts that I've met and that I don't ride with very often. And they'll say, can we go on a ride together? And I'm like, no problem. And sometimes I overwhelm people with how fast I go because I just feel confident and I've done it for a long time. But I also often ride slower than other people on the street that I feel are probably not as experienced or as good a rider as I am, if I'm being honest, but they ride faster than I do on the street because either that's the only thing they know, or they like the risk of it or something like that. But to me, the street, because I've ridden on the track so much and I appreciate track riding, so closed course riding so much, the street to me, like you said, is just a totally different thing. And I definitely ride slow. I've been testing recently this BMW R12 9T and having fun on it, riding around. And I took a ride up to Malibu on the north side of LA. There's lots of twisty roads, and I'm riding along twisty roads, and the foot pegs start dragging on the bike, which is not all that uncommon for bikes, especially the bike that's not really a true sport bike or anything, And the foot pegs are dragging, and I thought, like, in my first thought was kind of like, oh, how can I arrange my body on the bike so that I can lean over more without dragging the foot peg? And then the next thing that occurred to me an instant later was, this is probably fast enough. Actually, I don't, the foot pegs dragging should not be emblematic of like what a badass I am, but it should be emblematic of that's enough. That's what you don't need to go faster than that on the street. And if I were on the racetrack, it would be a whole different story. I'd be desperate to lean off more and keep the bike upright, and so the foot peg wouldn't drag, so that my lap time could be faster or whatever. But on the street, I definitely, there are aspects of riding on the street that I really like. But it's pretty far down the list before I get to speed. Speed is not really the thing that I'm on the street to enjoy. It's much more, there are lots of other things above it on the list. So I'm right there with you. It sounds like we'd be on the same pace, the little old man pace on the street.
Yeah, man. It's so 2 years ago I had a pretty big low side at Laguna Seca, like the bottom of the corkscrew, and then you straighten up to go under the bridge. So the bottom of the corkscrew,
and then there's the left-hander, the downhill left-hander, rainy curve.
Yeah, rainy curve.
You crashed there?
So, I got taken out. So it was the first lap of the day.
Oh no!
I'd never ridden there before. I'm
seriously?
like sliding. Yeah, and this dude just went straight into the back of me. I can send you the video. And now they say they say that on the track there are those that have crashed and those that haven't crashed yet.
Yes.
And this was my first crash on the track. So,
Uh-huh.
and I was like, my son was like, I think 6 months old at the time or something. And I just said, I'm stopping riding on the street. I'm done with the street, but I'm only going to ride on the track, even though I crashed. So I got that feeling of crashing, right? I said, okay, I can stop the street. I tried to stop the street. I just couldn't, man. Like I miss going into the garage and looking at that bike and jumping on it. And
Yeah.
do you have those same inner conflicts around, because the track is a safer place, even though I
Sure.
crashed badly there, but I
Sure.
got that feeling of crashing, and I've never crashed on the street, even all
Mm.
the time I've been riding.
Uh-huh.
I was like, man, if I'd been on the street and there was a truck coming, I'd be gone. And I
Right.
don't know, do you go back and forth on that, or you just,
You're talking about like from a sort of like family man standpoint of
yeah, do you ever consider
safety
not
and
riding on the street at all and just focusing on track?
yeah, I've entertained that. But first of all, it would screw up my job pretty bad since since I'm like a big part of what I do is
Yeah, yeah, right. True.
review street bikes. But no, aside from that, I mean, yeah, I've had that. I've had that thought cross my mind and sort of like, um, yeah, certainly. Because yeah, street accidents are scary, and I think it's a. I don't know if this anecdote will do anything for you, but people. I remember hearing someone say one time, like, "Oh, I don't want to." They said some passing comment like, "I don't want to think about what would happen if I went wide in that turn" or something like that. And
Mm-hmm.
in my head immediately I thought, I always think about what would happen if I went wide in that turn. That's so important. You have to think about what would happen if you went wide in that turn, or
Yeah.
if you're going through a right hander on a twisty mountain road, and what if there's a tractor stopped just
Yeah.
out of sight from wherever you are? Like, can you stop? Can you avoid it? Are you in
Mm-hmm.
a good position to make that decision or to help yourself in that moment? And it's gruesome. I find myself having really gruesome thoughts when I ride, but I think that is an important, not even a reality check, but a fantasy check, if you will, of, you know, I sort of, I do a lot of imagining what would go wrong. And I think that helps me realize the lanes that I need to be in figuratively in my own head.
Yeah.
And so part of it is maybe an addiction because I like riding on the street and I like I said, the challenge of it. And it's a part of my life and my lifestyle and my job
Yeah.
at this
Yeah.
point. But I also think that um, it's a mental and sort of psychiatric challenge that I like too, to sort of be real with yourself about what's important and what's not. And as far as the family aspect, that's the thing that weighs heavily on me. I also have a
Mm.
young son
I know. Yeah. Yeah.
and certainly I think about that. But my wife and I um, met uh, sort of at a motorcycling event. She's not a tried and true motorcyclist, but she was in the motorcycle industry sort of tangentially briefly. And I met her there, and she backpacked around the world alone in her 20s for more than a year, which is a dangerous thing to do as a young woman.
Mm, mm,
And
mm.
she's been to Everest Base Camp, and she climbed Mount Kilimanjaro, and she took trains across India, and she did things that were difficult and um, objectively dangerous. Um, and one of the things we talked about when we had a kid was, trying to balance safety and prudence in being a parent and being a provider for a young human being, while also being very much yourself, so that you are providing an example of what you think a person should do in their life, not specifically, but broadly. Having enthusiasms and ambition
Yes.
and wanting to be good at things and developing skills and following things that you love that's something that we want our son to grow up seeing and feeling. And the danger of it weighs on me, but maybe not more
Mm.
than how much it frightens me, the idea of him growing up in a sterile kind of environment, void of any, you know,
Risk.
feelings or risk. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm glad you raised that, and I'm also glad you raised your wife and talk about your wife, because without just, I'm going to make sure I say this in the right way without sounding like a dirty old man. So I was raised by my mom, so by a stolen mom. So I was
Uh-huh.
sort of raised with a sort of deep respect for, I know in the modern world we don't say men and women because there's all types of people, but the role of a strong woman in my life was my
Sure.
mother,
Sure.
right?
Yeah.
And one of the reasons I actually started the podcast to start with is I actually want to interview people who are from diverse backgrounds that are doing well or want to do well in motorcycling. And so my first interview um, was with Mallory Dobbs, who's a Moto America racer.
Right. Yeah. I know the name. Yeah.
Yep, yep, and Misty Hurst, who is a coach at the California Superbike School, but was also a racer, a long time back. Because she doesn't like me saying that because she doesn't want to sound like I'm making her sound old. But anyway, and I also recently interviewed Kayla Yakov, who I'm sure you know, and
Hmm.
is doing amazing. I mean, like
Yes.
that kid is she's like another level. And I'm curious, do you I'm not as experienced in racing as you are.
Uh-huh.
I ride in the A group and kind of mid pack. It's pretty good. I like it, but like, what is it? Do you think there will be a day when a woman can compete at the highest level? I'm not talking Moto 2 or Moto 3, I'm talking Moto GP.
Huh.
Like, what do you think about, what is it? I don't understand why that day shouldn't come, and why hasn't it come? I think about that a lot.
Well, did you ask Kayla this question?
Yeah, I did. And she said, first of all, I don't want to race in women's competitions,
Right. Sure.
right?
Yeah.
I want to
I've seen
race
her
with the
say
men.
that. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And she's a 17-year-old rider. And she could go and ride in these women's competitions, but she chooses not to because she's like,
Right.
no.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm glad you asked her that question because I don't know that I feel qualified to,
Yeah.
to answer the question about whether or not, how a woman will succeed in motorcycle racing. But my dad and I tell you that my dad and I have had these conversations at long road trips to races for years and
Yeah.
years. And one of the things we talked about was, was, was female racers and sort of like why they haven't had more success, because it's an interesting thing, like with, it's curious on the face of it. I think the reason, maybe this is part of the driver of your question, is that, um, like, why doesn't a woman play in the NBA, just to like pick a
Right.
random sport?
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
it's easy to point to the fact that women are, generally not as tall, generally can't jump as high.
Mm-hmm.
That's why there's there are physiological and physical differences between men and women, which is why there has historically been separation in sports, whether it's swimming, basketball, whatever. But motorcycle racing doesn't really fall into that, I don't think. And I would guess, I wonder actually if Kayla would say the same thing, that it is a physical sport to ride a motorcycle fast. You need to be strong and aggressive, but not in a way that a woman can't. It's not like,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
you have to be 7 feet tall, or it's not like you have to, run a 100 meters in a certain amount of time or something like that. It's really not, there isn't a physical barrier, I don't think. And I certainly don't think that there's a psychological barrier. Like, women can be just as competitive and fierce as men are,
Yeah.
wanting to win and that kind of thing. So it's really interesting. I think she is a real beacon for
Mm-hmm.
the sport, because I think she's proven that it's not, that gender doesn't really need to have anything to do with anything with motorcycles. I think it's got to be just, it's more of a cultural thing at this point, right? It's more that, like, boys like to chase the
Yeah.
ball more than girls
Yeah.
do, or like, boys are probably more encouraged to ride motorcycles when they're young, and they're more encouraged to race them when they're teenagers. And we're seeing that
Mm-hmm.
change, I think, fortunately. But I think that she's proof that there isn't any reason that a woman can't succeed in motorcycle racing, because I don't really think there are obvious barriers in,
Yeah.
from a physical standpoint or a mental standpoint or anything. I think it's all kind of cultural and who we choose to support. So
Yeah.
I really hope that I hope that there are lots of little girls right now looking at her and going, oh,
Mm-hmm.
like, I don't need there to be a girls class or a women's class, like, I can.
So do I. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Shout out to Kayla. You should interview her. She's a good
I'd
kid,
love
and
to. Yeah.
yeah, I can make the introduction. I'm sure she'd love to meet you. Her dad is a great guy too, and he was telling me that, like, the lap times she was putting up in Europe were faster than the woman who won the women's FIM Supersport championship this year.
Right. I
Okay,
believe
but
it.
she
Yeah.
was too young, first of all, to race in that, Kayla, so
Oh,
she
really?
couldn't. Yeah, but I don't think she wants to. And I agree. I don't think there's anything. I think in my lifetime we'll see someone in the MotoGP class. I will tell you that at the track days I do, girls kick my ass all day long. There's a bunch of them, and they're fast.
Sure.
And I should also do a shout out for Haley. Thank you, Haley, for introducing me to you, because Haley's one of those women in the motorcycle that I love. I just love meeting these
female
kids.
track goers. Right. Right.
Yeah, I mean, she's a kid to me, right? And so, like, these kids are just into riding, and she moved to LA, I think, and she's like into it. I also want to be respectful of your time, by the way, so I don't want to go forever, but
no, go for it. I'm enjoying the chat. I'm enjoying, pontificating on women in motorcycling. I'm sure all the women listening really appreciate my point of view. Another 40-year-old white man telling the world how he feels.
It's interesting. Well, yeah, for sure. I think I actually think all minorities, regardless of whether it's motorcycling, benefit from the person in the majority knowing that it's unfair and wanting to do something about it. And I think if you can be that voice and that advocate, the other thing I love is young dads now who have daughters. In my day, it would be like, oh, you've got a daughter. I hope you have a shotgun. If you guys that want to date her, my mates are like, no, I'm raising strong women. They don't need a man to take care of them. I'm raising strong women. And I think that's part of the cultural thing you're talking about. It's that, like, no, like, we're raising a generation of really strong women, and they can do anything. Right now, there are some things that I get it. It's harder than others, but it's a good topic, man. Like, did you follow the FIM championship in Europe this year? The women's Supersport championship?
The women's one? I didn't know, and that's not because it has to do with women. Yeah, I didn't follow World Superbike either, or British Superbike, or other series that are awesome, and I can't find the time to do it. I sort of like, I hang on to by my fingernails. I try to keep up with MotoGP, just because I don't know, that's the series I sort of find myself most interested in, and the personalities and the technology and stuff like that. There are lots of series that I don't pay attention to, and it's only because I don't have the time for it. But I guess it's a good thing, like, I guess I'm conflicted. I don't know. Like, what do you think? I feel like it's great that there's a platform, but also I probably have, I don't know. I guess I admire so much the Kayla Yakov outlook of, like, I just want to race against racers. I don't, I had a buddy one time years ago he was a club racing friend. We raced amateur super sport stuff and club racing, and there's always this thing about, like, kind of hangers on in the amateur. Like, the club we raced in actually had 3 tiers. There was amateur, and then there was junior or novice, and junior and expert, right? So there were 3 tiers to work your way up to an actual expert number plate, and expert racers racing against the fastest people. And there were always these kind of hangers on who would, like, stay in the novice category so that they could, like, win the championship, or, like, so that they could be the fastest novice, And my buddy at the time had this outlook of, like, I don't want to be measured against the people who have the same colored number plate as I do. I want to be measured against the best people that are riding the same kind of bike that I'm riding. That's what I want to do. And I personally have never won a club racing championship. Like, I raced RS 125 for years, never won that championship. I raced a GSXR 600 and R6 for years at 600cc Supersport. And I never won a championship in any class. And it's not like I am proud. That's a badge I wear proudly, but I am much, much, much more proud of finishing second in a 600cc expert championship than I ever was winning a novice race,
Yeah, sure.
And so I appreciate anyone who has that outlook, I guess.
Are you a competitive person? Like, whether it's in sports, career, like, you name it? Or...
Yeah, I am.
Okay.
Yeah, I think, I have that bone in my head for sure. I think that edge dulls a little bit as you get older, maybe, because you don't have the same rush of of hormones, I guess.
Yeah, sure.
When you're in competition, like I think about some of the ways that I used to compete, and I think, holy mackerel, like I don't think I'd ever be in that mindset right now, but I certainly have that, and I think you kind of need to, I had someone reach out to me on Instagram the other day, and they said, I'm a rider. I've been going to track days. I'm getting faster, but I'm like really struggling to get to that next level. Like, how do I lean over more? How do I brake later? How do I do that stuff? And my quick answer to them was race. I've
Mhm.
never had a greater motivator than wanting to beat the person that's ahead of me. I
Yeah.
That's the thing that'll make you go faster. If you want to learn to brake later, go into a corner next to someone. And if you
Yeah.
don't care that they get to the apex first, then this whole thing's not for you.
Yeah.
But you will.
Yeah.
I bet you will. I bet you will care that that person is going to try to get to that apex first, and you're going to want to do it. And so you'll do whatever it takes to brake later and figure it out. And I
Mm.
certainly have those triggers in my head, and I think that's it's a fascinating part of the human psyche.
Mm.
And it's also crucial for my enjoyment of motorcycles. Definitely is to like have that competitive feel.
Yeah, it's funny because I'm actually not super competitive. And I'm actually, no one believes this, but I'm actually an introvert. I'm an expressive introvert. But it's just that I communicate pretty well. So people think, oh, shit. And we have kind of this old man category too that we race in at the Ridge Motorsport Park here,
Uh-huh.
which is our local. And I'll see kids that have come, or even older guys who've come from the street and sort of, hey, I'm the shit, blah, blah, blah. And they'll, after the first session, they're so tired, they can't even walk. And so I'll go and talk to them like, hey, man, like there's two groups. One group is, hey, I've been riding for 20 years. I've got it. The other group is, I want to learn. I'm like, okay. The reason you're tired is because you're like gripping onto the bars. You're like, you're
Oh
not
yeah,
relaxed.
absolutely.
Like I'm an old fat guy in my 50s and I'll do like 6 sessions a day and like for 3 days in a row sometimes. And I'm tired, but I'm not as tired as I used to be
Right.
through having a learner's mindset, right? So I've done
Sure.
Yamaha Champ School. I'm a big fan of California Superbike School. I've done Ken
Sure.
Hill stuff. Like in your mind, where does instruction, is instruction important? Like what advice would you have for, this is kind of getting a little bit of high side, low side, I suppose, but what advice would you have for someone of moderate means that has ridden on the street for a while that wants to go to the track for the first time? So they get instruction from day one, or should they just go out there and let it rip? Like what would you,
Good question.
I'm
Well,
curious about that one. Yeah.
before I answer that, I have a question for you, which is
Yeah.
you said you're not really a competitive person.
No, I'm competitive. Like I don't have a lap timer on my bike because
Okay.
I'm more focused on how I feel in the flow. And
Okay.
like I'll see
So
guys that go
is it
really
more like
fast.
meditative kind of like
Well,
you're after like where do you get your kicks if it's not from like, oh, I went
okay.
faster than I did last time?
Okay, so it's like skiing. So like I'm a kind of an expert skier, and I love the feeling of hitting all my lines, all my flags, and I know when I get to the bottom of the hill, I just know I nailed it. And on the bike, it's the same. So I'll see guys, and it's competing with myself. I'll see guys that post these videos on YouTube on the track of how great they are, and they miss every single apex. And I'm like, okay, well, I love the feeling of being technically excellent and looking at my videos. That's what gets me going, and I get excited. And I'm
Right on.
doing like under 2 minute lap time at the Ridge now. It's fast, but it's not like super fast, but it's A group fast. And 2 years ago, I was like a 2:30. So I'm like,
Uh-huh.
that's how I get rid of myself, Zach. You know?
I see. Sure.
Yeah. Have you been to a Ridge? Have you ridden at the Ridge?
I have not. No, I've heard it's great. I'd love to try it.
Dude,
I've never been there.
come up.
Um,
I'll give you a bike. I've got a Trofeo. I've got a Aprilia Trofeo, which is
okay.
yeah, I've got a V2
Sure.
Panigale. And then I've got a stock RS660 as well. You're gonna come
Okay.
up and grab a bike. I'll take you riding. But anyway,
Okay.
yeah,
I,
seriously, you should come up.
that's a lovely offer. It's hard to turn down. So I appreciate it. Well, that's interesting. I think it's fascinating that
Yeah,
you do get some joy out of going faster, but it's more about the feeling of going faster and the
yeah,
appreciation of going faster than it is like the lap time. And I think that's totally fair. Like, um, it's like that is really kind of like what we're all after. It's just that if you can look at data, you can
yeah.
tell yourself that it happened, whether it did
That's
or
right.
not. So
That's
I can
right.
appreciate where you're coming
Yeah,
from.
yeah, and
Yeah.
it's great you mentioned data, right? So I do look at the data. Like and so when I do use a lap timer, it's more less about the total time. It's more about where I can make up time in the corners, right?
Right.
And that
Sure.
um and the
So
whole physics of it.
so as for the question of whether
Yeah,
someone should get instruction,
Yeah.
I would say no. I've said this recently to people who have asked the same question.
Mm.
Just go to the track and ride around. Just go see if you like it and what you like and that kind of thing. And if you see, if you feel this sort of like spur of like ambition to go faster and you want to learn more, then I think that's a, you know, like getting instruction is a good idea. But really, like, what people benefit from the most, I think, at the track and learning at the track is good influence. And really that's what track day instructors should be providing from a broad view, from a broad perspective, is good influence, right? Like good practices, good etiquette, stuff like that, good things to focus on, and you know, like methods to learn, rather than like, this is how you do it. Like you like, don't hit the brakes until this point and then turn in at this point. That's not what it is, right? It's really more like about methodology and sort of learning to trust yourself and trust the bike and trust the tires and trust the process. But to answer your question, I would say if you haven't done it before, just go and try it and see what you think, and then take it from there.
That's cool. Yeah. Maybe get a
I don't know.
control rider.
I'm not saying I'm right, but that's just my.
No. I ask everyone this question, by the way, and I asked races. I asked Mallory this question, actually. She's like said the same thing as you. But I would also maybe say, like, get a control rider to tow you around. Like some of the track day organizations are great. Up here we have Track Time, who are really great. And there's a bunch of others, but I just say get a control rider to tow you around and stuff.
That's a good influence. Yeah. I mean, like, just like learning where to go is a pretty crucial piece of it. And if you're new to a track and you're in the slowest group, following other people around is unfortunately probably not the best idea, because they don't know what they're doing either. And this goes back to that conversation about sidecars, right? Like that's how I first started going around tracks, was like, sidecars, you're like leaning in right-hand corners we had a right-hand chair. So like in right-hand corners, I'm like leaning out the sidecar over the apex and I'm sort of like watching the track come at me. But as transition into a left-hand corner, I would go up over the back wheel of the sidecar and be literally looking over my dad's shoulder, like as he was, as he was going through corners. And like, there's just no more, that was the original GoPro. Like there's no better or more immersive way to like learn your way around a track. So I was super lucky in that sense, but a lot of people get to go to the track and they don't have that. In fact, most people go to the track and don't have that. So yeah, to your point, that's why a control rider is so crucial and such a good idea.
Well, I suppose we should probably start working and closing things down. But man, I've really enjoyed chatting. It's been awesome.
Or we could just go for the world's longest podcast. I don't know how much time we could go to like 10 p.m. tonight and just like see if people listen to it.
Yeah, and it's funny. Like I've got a mate of mine, Rick, who's done a few podcasts for me, and he's been interviewing some of the really seasoned California Superbike school instructors. And so he has done 6 hours of recording with James Tui, who, if you might know James. James is the name, one of the most senior. I mean, Johnny, who's the head of the coaching program, and like I'm the guy that has to edit it because I'm not a professional like you, Zach. I actually had to do it myself. I know you have editors, right? But I'm gonna I want to sort of close with a few things. Like, what was the last bike you rode? Because I watch all of your Daily Rider stuff. Okay. And there's a few trademarks here. You've got that little laugh that you do, which is classic. Like you know what I'm talking about, right? It's like the giggle. Like the giggle, like right?
Ready, everybody? Here we go.
That's like you got to trademark that shit, man. That's cool. It's like the let's get ready to rumble guy. You know how he trademarked that?
Oh,
let's get ready to rumble. Yeah, he trademarked it. You got to trademark that shit. Like I know you ride bikes on the Daily Rider, but like, what's the last bike that you rode that you just couldn't stop thinking about and wanted to go buy? Like,
that I wanted to go buy.
Yeah.
That's a tough one. Well, two bikes stand out from this year, from 2024. One is the bike that I just stopped riding today, which is the BMW R12 9T. It's the first bike in a long time that I went on Craigslist and I looked for BMW R9Ts from 2014 to 2014 to 2020. I think that was the sort of like 2 generations in there that I kind of liked. And they had this really garish weld down the middle of the gas tank. And I just remember really liking that bike. The new bike is good in a lot of the same ways, but also is kind of like softer around the edges in some ways I don't like. The point is, the reason I like that bike is not because it's God's gift to motorcycling. It just speaks to me big time because it's, I like how I like the classic look. I like the round headlight. I like the sort of shapely tank and the old style BMW Boxer, the oil head Boxer. I grew up in a BMW household. I grew up with my dad riding BMWs of the 60s and 70s, airhead BMWs. And so that style of engine really kind of speaks to me. The character of the engine speaks to me. It feels like a modern interpretation of the bike that I would have built in my head when I was 11 years old or something like that, because it was like partially my dad's dream and partially my dream, based on that influence. And I could see myself owning one of those bikes and enjoying riding it because I like the way it smells like oil when you park it, and it sort of like twists and snorts like a sort of semi-feral horse. I like
feel that way about Goozies. I feel that way about Goozies.
Yeah, Goozies does the same kind of thing. Yeah.
Cool.
And my dad loves Goozies for the same reason.
Yeah.
But anyway, the 9T is something that I did catch myself shopping for. And the other bike this year was that KTM 890 SMT, which was, I mean, just like that bike is just right up my alley. That's exactly what I think. It's brushing up, not that it's a perfect motorcycle or a perfectly executed product, but the concept of it brushes up against perfection in motorcycling as far as I'm concerned. It's like, it's comfortable on the highway. You could ride the thing anywhere. You could take off bone stock across the country and probably be perfectly happy if all you did was 80-mile-an-hour super slab. And also it's like rowdy and it does wheelies and it's agile and it's tall. It has good suspension. It's good for a city. It's good for the country. It's like you can put saddlebags on it. It's just like it's almost the jack of all trades, master of none is the classic sort of BMW GS thing. I just feel like I don't realistically ride in the dirt. I live in cities. That's not a thing I do. So having basically like an ultra versatile pavement bike is my dream. And that KTM 890 SMT was wicked.
You and I share that because that is on my list too. And actually, so I'm a big fan. I think one of the most underrated motorcycles in that sort of category is always been the Multistrada V2 or 950. I still like to be able to go down a highway and be curious. So you're curious about what's down that fucking dirt road, and be able to go down there, but not need to have the big fuck off, adventure bike. And I actually have a new Honda. I have the new Honda Africa Twin, which has a 19-inch front, which actually is very, very capable road bike now, much more capable. So I'll tell you my bike, the one bike, and I rode it yesterday. I was just screaming the whole time. My local dealer has a really good deal on a 2023 Ninja 1000 SX H2.
Okay. Yep.
Holy
supercharged
shit.
One.
I saw you ride the roadster version of it, like the naked
one,
version
the
of it.
H2.
Yeah.
Yep.
But the SX one is oh my God. This thing, I'm like, I have no need for it, but it just, because I rode the Ninja 1000 SX, the non-H2, which is also, the reason I like sports bikes like that on the street, probably similar to you, is I like feeling like I'm connected to the motorcycle. Yeah. Whereas on an ADV, I'm like a human sail. And I want to feel connected to the fucking motorcycle, man. I don't want to be like just a passenger on it.
Sure.
Right.
Yeah, that's fair. That's very fair. And yeah, the Ninja 1000 is a great bike. But the sort of like H2SX version, the supercharged one, really takes it up a notch. And that's fair. That engine is pretty addictive.
The RS is nice too. The BMW RS, the 12, I think that's underrated. The 1250 RS.
Yeah. Yep. Those models are always underrated, and they don't. My only problem with it is like I would probably just get a GS. Like I don't know what an RS does for me that a GS doesn't. I guess is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
But so I think that's why it's underrated, because not very many people buy it, and then when you ride one, you're like, wow. If it doesn't have a huge handlebar and like crash bars all over it, it's actually a pretty nice bike. Like it's lighter and smaller and lower and everything.
Well, I want to thank you because I think. It's easy to like do a podcast of a person that is, in this new modern world, there are these things called influencers, apparently. I'm too old. I'm too old to understand what they do. I see a lot of influencers that don't know shit, but they have lots of followers. You're not that type of person. Like, you know your shit. And what's really cool is I got to learn about you. Like, everyone knows, you know, a thing or two about motorcycles, given. But we talked about motorcycles, but it was really cool just getting to know you, man. And I probably listened to every High Side Low Side podcast. I'll tell you that you've never once replied to one of my emails, fuckers. I've been trying to get a T-shirt, and I have written reviews, and I love your shit. So, thank you, man.
Well, now that I've been on your podcast, I'll send you a T-shirt. Now that I know now that I know you want one, I'm happy to do that.
I'll send you a Kiyomoto T-shirt, but just so you know, I only wear black. It's the only color I ever wear, so it's black.
I can make that work.
Okay, and regardless, like, as you know from the beginning, this thing is kind of a bit of fun for me. It's not my day job, and so it's just cool to, and quite frankly, an honor to meet you. And your career is going so well, and I can't wait to be like in a rest home as an old man when you're about my age, and I'll be reading your shit and going, "Oh yeah, I remember him," you know.
Well, I'll probably be next to you in the same rest home, looking at the same magazine, saying, "I remember that guy." Yeah. Well, I appreciate it. It's been fun talking to you about bikes and life and so on and so forth. And I hope at some point we can share a ride. Maybe we don't like group rides, either of us.
Yeah.
But but we can tolerate each other long enough to go on a ride or share the track or something like that. That'd be fun.
No, and I mean that. Like, hold me to it. I've got a fucking garage full of motorcycles. If you can get yourself up here, come and do a track day, and I'll provide the motorcycle. You just got to get up here.
All right. That's an awfully generous offer. Thank
you. You'll kick my ass, but I'll enjoy chasing you.
Right on. Well, I won't make any sheep jokes.
Oh, good. That's good. Thank you. That's even more respect now. See, that's awesome. and say hello to Spurgeon Dunbar for me.
I will.
He's all grown up now. He's a dad and everything. It's weird. I'm trying to picture him as a dad. Hey.
No, mini Spurge. There's another Spurgeon in the world. A tiny little Spurgeon floating around the pond.
All right, man. Hey, happy holidays to you, Zach.
Likewise. Thanks for the time.
Ride safe.